Good morning.
Good morning.
Let's try that one more time. Good morning.
Good morning.
Let's try that one more time. Good morning.
Good morning. Okay.
All right. I'm Chad Mance, and I'm a rogue trial lawyer. And sort of what I do is essentially I sue people, and I'm always in court bringing cases. Some of those cases involve folks that have been killed by the police. Some of them involve people who have inadequate medical care. Some of them involve people who have been injured en masse by dangerous products. Some of them involve regular old, I got bumped in the back cases while riding in a car. But the majority of the people I represent look like you and me. First, before I start, I want to thank Miss Evangeline Mitchell. Where's she at? Y'all give her a round of applause. She does amazing things every year and puts together what I think is one of the best programs for budding law students in America. Y'all really are lucky. And I also want to thank my fellow speakers. These are some of the most decorated lawyers that you're going to see, and they look like you and me. And they took their time to come out and share truth with you. You guys are blessed in overabundance. So let's give them a round of applause, too. So my speech to you is really a charge, okay? I could tell you about me. I could tell you about some of the things that I do. You can read the bio, too. I'm certainly not the most decorated person up here, but we all have our credentials. I want to remind you of who you are. Historically, what HBCUs have done. And the title of my talk with you, which I'll keep relevant but brief, is The Social Engineer, the HBCU Lawyer. The African American lawyer's presence has profoundly affected democracy in this nation. Judicial institutions and our overall conception of equity in America and throughout the world. From the civil rights litigation of the 1960s to the wrongful death litigation in cases like Mike Brown, we have produced as social engineers men and women who have used the law as their sword and the Constitution as their shield. You are among the men and women who, using the power of the pen and the voice of the Constitution, decided to change the world. That is a profound advantage. So Liz talked to you a bit earlier about what it means to feel as though you belong in the room. Why might you belong in the room? Could it be because Thurgood Marshall is an HBCU graduate? Why might you belong in the room? Could it be because men like Charles Johnson, one of the most decorated and trailblazing black partners here in Atlanta, has chosen to give his time, talent, treasure, and energy to Tuskegee as general counsel? Could it be because men like Clyde are pouring into you? You guys come from a rich heritage of trailblazers. And identity, my HBCU brothers and sisters, my social engineers, identity is everything. Let's not get it twisted. We live in the United States of America where there's Scooter Libby justice for some and Meek Mill justice for other people. You just heard that. Where there's Paul Manafort justice for some, but then there's Lil Boosie justice for others. Those men and women look like you and me. So let's not get it twisted. When 5% of the legal profession is African American, and our judges disproportionately are not represented by our community, do you think they leave their biases at the door? Identity is everything. Now, of course, there's a judicial code of conduct, right? But there's a such thing as subconscious bias. Bias of which we're not aware. That is always emanating about the room and is always operating on how we think. So what must a social engineer like you do? The first thing is you got to remember who you are, okay? And remember where you come from. A social engineer remembers who he or she is and remembers where they come from. Because all of you, whether you're men, women, black, white, Latino, Asian, African American, whatever you are, have witnessed profound injustice. Do you think, humor me if you will, that Charles Hamilton Houston, who died before seeing the effects of Brown, that he disregarded his experiences growing up in a segregated world? The Brown case, which resulted, as we all know, in the dismantling of the separate but equal doctrine, consisted of many plaintiffs in many states over many years. It wore on Charles Hamilton Houston so much so that Charles Hamilton Houston would die from overworking himself, as doctors would tell him. If you read Root and Branch, it'll tell you his story, which was profoundly great and also profoundly disheartening in some ways. Houston articulated this idea that black lawyers, in particular, and lawyers really globally in disadvantaged communities, have two choices. Either you can be a social engineer or you'll be a social parasite. They're mutually exclusive. They can't exist at the same time. So a social engineer sees injustice and acts upon it. A social parasite sees injustice and silently endorses it. Does nothing, says nothing, doesn't speak out, chooses conformity as the law of the day. A social engineer innovates in the application of the Constitution. Do you think that immediately after the Brown decision came down, that schools desegregated? It took many years for desegregation to become a reality, not just a legal principle. And it took many lawyers, the Donald Hollowells of the world, the Judge, rest in peace, Horace Ward of the world, to make sure that the injustice that they felt, which was a complex, evolving institution, was remedied using the Constitution. Now, how might they have done that? There was a statute, which is used today, the 1983 statute, that was broad in its application. It said if there was any underlying constitutional violation, you could bring a claim. That if there's a pattern of practice, you could bring a claim. Now that same law, that same statute has been restrictively interpreted by federal courts lately. But that statute was the vehicle to you sitting here today in an integrated room. Don't leave your identities at the doorstep. Remember who you are. Now, what else might a social engineer do? A social engineer knows the constitutional rights afforded him or her. A social engineer doesn't use the Constitution as a mere paperweight. The social engineer realizes that the Constitution is a shield and a sword, that you can use it to attack wrong, and you can use it as a cloak to protect you from wrong. These brothers and sisters got up here and told you that you belong. Well, not only does the law say that you belong, the law ensures that you belong. And the 14th Amendment, born after what I think was one of the most glorious periods in American and world history, Reconstruction, specifically contemplated you. It said you can't treat one group that's a protected class different from another group. You can't treat blacks different from whites, men different from women. And you guys have to embrace that. Social engineers always fight for the underclassed. Now I'm going to break Clyde's rule. Clyde got up here and he told you about all the great folks he represents. But you know, he still made time to talk to you. He's fighting for the underclassed. He's fighting to make sure that many of you can become partners. Liz took time from what she was doing, and Liz is outstanding. Humble, but very outstanding. Representing big corporations to come here and talk to you because she's fighting for you. And all the other speakers have done the same thing. What else might a social engineer do? I had a speech, but the speech doesn't matter. The message does. A social engineer is not passive. It's not a passive, complacent recipient of the status quo. A social engineer doesn't listen to Jazz's story and say, oh, that's Meek Mill, that's not me. I'm not a rapper, I'm a college student. A social engineer extrapolates that story and says, it could easily come to my house. Because one of our HBCU graduates, Dr. King, said, an injustice anywhere is a threat to justice where? Everywhere. And I'm going to tell you, injustice is the greatest cancer known to man. If you do not extract it, if you do not remove it, I assure you it will grow. So, social engineers realize that no man, no woman is an isle of their own. That we're all interconnected. And that if wrong is up the street, wrong will soon be knocking on my doorstep. So, social engineers do a lot of other things. But these are the main points that I want you to think about as you contemplate your role and identity as a lawyer. Because there are many issues. Just across my desk, one of the issues that my firm has taken up is that we find that certain drug companies target folks that might have diabetes. Who might you think those folks are? And folks have kidney failure, or folks have organ failure. And there are massive studies that show that it's probably going to be folk like us. Injustice is widespread, and injustice is very profitable. What might you think would happen if folks didn't have the courage to bring the litigation? It would go on and on and on and on. And the courts are filled with pleas for folks' rights. So, I want you to begin to think about your role, your personhood, your identity, as a social engineer. We got enough lawyers in the world. We got enough briefcase holding people who think that they're important, well-credentialed individuals. But be like these folks over here. Be social engineers. Take the stories of your rich heritages and your families with you. Because in the end, you won't be remembered by your resume, and you won't be remembered by your law school. You won't be remembered by your LSAT score or what firm you worked at. You'll be judged by what you did for somebody, why you did it, and how you did it. So my social engineers, my HBCU future lawyers, I want you to begin to challenge yourself to be more than just a lawyer. Be a social engineer. Thank you.